Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Josh, and I'm standing out here in one of my potato fields just outside of Thamesville, Ontario. Thanks for joining in, and happy local food week, everyone. Just quickly about me, I guess. I'm a young farmer in the Chatham, Kent area, and on my farm here, we grow mostly potatoes. And uh, yeah, after high school, I attended the University of Guelph to learn more about farming and agriculture in general to do the best possible job I can when I started farming on my own. And after university, I moved out to Prince Edward Island, where I worked on a potato farm there as an agronomist. And I'll get into more what an agronomist is in a bit, but we learned all kinds about potatoes from Prince Edward Island, pretty near the potato capital of Canada, I'd say, which is funny to say because I'm sitting here in a field in Ontario growing potatoes too. So it's pretty cool stuff. Um, yeah, so I'm a potato farmer here in Ontario, and in Ontario and Canada, for that matter, we grow all kinds of different potatoes, but primarily three different categories, which would be seed, processing, and table. And you go, geez, Josh, what does any of that mean? And I'll break that down. So for processing, we'll start there because those are the most grown in Canada. Those are potatoes that are grown so we can have chips on our shelves or we can have French fries to eat. Those sorts of things that they're going to be made into something else aside from just a raw potato. And then here on my farm, we grow table potatoes. And you go, what are table potatoes, Josh? And table potatoes are the ones that we're going to grow and we're going to wash and grade and package so that they can go to the grocery store closest to you guys and you can take home and put on your table and have for supper. And then the third category is seed. So for us to grow our potato crop here, that's out behind me, we have to be able to plant that with something. And so there's some growers that all they do is they grow seed potatoes so that growers like myself can plant our own potatoes and supply you. So yeah, thanks for joining us here and on a lovely Friday afternoon. And quick question: does anyone know what a potato's favorite day of the week is? Trick question. It's a Friday. Anywho, so we'll jump right into it. Here we've got a crop of potatoes. I'm gonna figure out how to turn my camera around, and we'll take a look at some of the potatoes behind us here and see what we can see. So these are the potatoes as they're growing today, and all we see right now is the foliage of it. And it's a great question from Jessica, whether a potato is a vegetable or a root. Well, it's actually kind of both of those. So we've got the plant growing here, and this is what's going to be the energy source for the crop that we're going to harvest in a few weeks' time. And if I pull a plant, then underneath of it, we're going to find some potatoes. And there's a few really cool pieces to look at here. So take that plant. And so you asked if it was a vegetable or root. Well, it is a root, and it's a vegetable for that matter. And so underneath, I can dig up the hill, and we've got some of the potatoes that we're going to harvest in a few short weeks sitting underneath the hill for us here. Which always a really fun game because you can stick your hand in the hill anywhere and pull out some fresh potatoes. So part of what it takes to grow a potato crop is about 2 months ago we came through with a planter, and we dropped a seed potato and put a little bit of fertilizer and some extra stuff to make the plant nice and healthy, and then covered it over with a nice hill of potatoes, or with a hill of dirt, sorry. And a seed potato here for us is this little guy here that I just am pulling off the plant. Hard to do with the sunlight, but this little guy here is what we are going to grow our entire crop from. And all that it is a potato that was grown last year that we planted in the soil this year, and it's a just a direct propagation, or came from another plant grown last year. And so technically, I could use any of these potatoes here that I just dug out of the hill a minute ago, and I can save them till next year and put them in the ground, and they're going to come out looking like this next year with a whole crop of potatoes underneath them. So we got some pretty cool questions. How many potatoes do we grow each year? So here at our farm, we're growing about 300 acres of potatoes. And for some interesting numbers, um, 1 acre would be about a little over one football field. So if you could imagine, 300 and just a little over 300 football fields end on end would be how many potatoes we grow here at our farm. Or interestingly, if you can think of a tennis court, 1 acre is about 15 and a half tennis courts. And so if we take that, it's about 4,500 tennis courts to grow all of the potatoes that we grow here on my farm. And another great question coming in, where are potato seeds located? And they're all across Canada. So every province grows a little bit of seed. Some provinces, like Alberta and Prince Edward Island, for instance, grow really, really good seed, and they do a lot more seed than other provinces like we do here in Ontario. It's just depending on the weather and the climate, but everyone does grow some seed in each province. It doesn't take anything super special to a degree to grow a crop of potatoes. Flip the camera around again. There we go. Yeah, so those are some good questions. So when we are going to come through and harvest these potatoes, and a couple weeks time to get ready for the shelves of the grocery store close to you guys, we're going to come through with a potato harvester, which is going to dig up these entire hills and separate the soil and the potatoes and everything else, so that at the end of the day, all we have coming into our warehouse to wash and make sure we got the best quality going to the grocery store, uh, and get that ready for you guys. And in most cases, we'll do a lot of that fresh off the field, where we just dig them right from the field and they go straight to the grocery store. And in other cases, to make sure we've got excellent quality product on the stores year round, we'll put them into what we call as a storage warehouse. And it's a facility or a building that is climate controlled, so we can keep the potatoes nice and cool, um, and in complete darkness with good humidity, because potatoes love moisture, and make sure that they stay nice and fresh, in order to store for seed next year, or to store until next March and April to also pack out and put on the grocery store shelves closest to you, or to put through and process into chips or anything like that. For us here, from planting to harvest, we will typically be about 80 to 90 days. So these potatoes here behind me were planted on the 20th of March, and come about July 12 or July 15, we're going to be ready to harvest these things to put on the store shelves for the season. Um, yeah, it's a pretty short day crop. Potatoes in general like cooler climates. So here in southwestern Ontario, we often have a lot of really hot days like it is right now. And the potatoes don't really like that as much. It takes a lot of the energy from them. And if you can imagine just being outside yourselves on a day like today, where feel a lot of stress, I guess, from the sun, and it's very hot and you're sweating all the time, you got to drink lots of water to make sure you stay hydrated and healthy. And the same thing is for potatoes. So on hot days like this, we have to make sure that we can keep water, make sure our potatoes have lots of water to keep them healthy and hydrated, get through the heat also. And one of the ways we do that is through something called irrigation. And that's a pretty fancy term, but all it means is we run a big sprinkler over our fields to make sure we can put some water down on the potatoes as they're growing, and help them, just like you would have some water on a hot day, make sure they can have some water on a hot day too, and that they can grow to be the healthiest, best crop that we want them to be. And the other piece I see, there's another great question that came in from is what is the best soil to grow potatoes in? And you can grow potatoes in a lot of different soils, and the trick is that we got to be able to harvest them. And if we grow them on a very heavy clay soil with lots of clay particles in it, it can be really difficult come fall to be able to harvest those because the clay sticks together really tight. So what we do is we grow all of our potatoes on some nice sandy soil, kind of like what you'd find at the beach actually, which is kind of fun. But it makes it a lot easier to harvest them, and they tend to grow a little bit better on some nice sandy soils. There's a really great question that's using my agronomist background to help answer. And so I'm going to touch on what an agronomist is for first, just to help explain that, because that's a pretty cool piece. So my background and training after the University of Guelph is in agronomy. And one of the things I did is I got my CCA, which is a certified crop advisor. And just like we humans need doctors and nurses to make sure we're healthy and in good shape and doing the best we can in the farming world, we need people called agronomists to work with the farmers and make sure that our crops are growing in the best possible shape. And if there are problems like diseases and pests and stuff, just like we can get diseases as humans, then we can step in and help and determine what those diseases are and how can we manage through and make that crop come back or heal that crop so that we can do the so we can assist and help farmers do the best possible jobs that they want to do. And so, as part of that training, it's we learn about all aspects of agriculture, and we do a lot of livestock integration too. Whereas agronomy is more focused on plants and the environment and soils, livestock all plays a really important part into that. So, as part of that is looking at the soil composition. Our soils here in Thamesville, Ontario, are very high in sand and very low in silts and clay. And humus or organic matter is another word that we could use to describe that. Um, we would be running 3.5 to 4.5% organic matter in our farms, and our sand content would be somewhere in the 75 to 80% range, with 5 to 7% silt, and the remainder as clay. So very, very little silt and clay particles in these soils. Flip the camera around so see if we can see it. It's very similar here to what you would find at the beach actually. They're very, very sandy. There we go. So as we can see here, I just dug this soil up less than 5 minutes ago, and it's already drying out just like you would at the beach. If you took um, that sand and you set it on the top, it's going to dry out really fast. So it's hard to tell on a camera, and but if you feel it, it's very coarse, and it'd be a very nice soil to uh, have a pond and sit at your own beach with here. But the potatoes love growing in it. Um, yeah, what are some other things we could talk about? So hills. When we plant these potatoes, we put some soil around them for a couple purposes. In the older days, when we didn't have access to technology like we do today, hilling was a traditional method to make sure we could keep weeds at bay. And if we have weeds in the field, they're drawing the nutrients and the water that we want to push into our potatoes. We'd be drawing them out, and you'd have less of a nice crop of potatoes. And so that was kind of older method, and coupled with hills are also very important to make sure we can keep these potatoes away from the sun. If you ever left a potato out on your counter, or if I leave these out much longer in the sun, they're going to start to turn green. And when we eat green potatoes, um, they taste very bitter and they're not very good for you. So one of the things we do as potato farmers is we put nice big hills around the plants as they're growing, so that the potatoes that we are growing are going to stay nice and dark and covered in soil and be good quality when they go to uh, the grocery stores. And so there's another great question that came through and is on potato skins. And do you have to peel the potatoes before you eat it? And potato skins are quite healthy, just like apple skins or anything. It's kind of on your preference, but a lot of nutrients in a potato is actually in the skin also. And what's really cool is right now the potatoes that I just dug up are what we'd call new potatoes. They don't have much of a skin on them. It's gonna spend forever flipping my camera around, but this is pretty cool stuff. Oh, just bear with me for a second. There we go. So if I take a look at this potato here and I brush up really fresh, and that's what we call characteristic of a new potato. It's very new, fresh crop out of the year. And if I was to put my harvester in a field like this, by the time it made it across the harvester, all of the skin would be missing. And that's some pretty awesome quality product right there. The skins are delicious and they taste fantastic. It's a nice addition to have into the meal. And so what we do as potato farmers to make sure we can store these potatoes until next year is before we come in the harvester, we'll actually kill all these plants. We'll take the vines off and we'll chop them right off and make sure they're good and dead. And we'll leave the potatoes sitting in the soil for 2 to 3 weeks so that, and what that does is it tells the potato to get ready for long time storage. It's going to be sitting there for a while, and after about 3 weeks, it'll set up a really nice skin actually, so that when I press my finger over this potato, I can't push that skin off anymore. It's nice and sealed and tight on the potato. Which leads right into the next great question. Do we have a washing station for potatoes at our farm? And yes, we do. So one of the cool pieces is once we've got a good skin sitting on these potatoes here, we can put them through our wash line, and it's made up of a few different pieces to make sure we can do a good job. And the first is what we call a wet hopper, where potatoes are dumped into a big tank of just water. And what that can do is if we have stones in the potatoes, or if we've got chunks of corn cob from another year or something like that, all those will be removed first and gone, so that after that wet hopper, all we have left is just wet potatoes. And then, but they're still going to be covered in quite a bit of dirt. It takes a little bit of effort to get all this dirt off of these potatoes. And so what we do is we put them through something what we call polisher. And it's just some very gentle brush in essence polish them so that they're a nice shiny potato coming out the other side. And then what we can do is we can grade them
Hey Josh, can you hear me?
so that anything that doesn't there we go, we're back. Sorry, we're rural internet is not always the best, and it can be often difficult to have good reception. But I guess I'll just move on from the potatoes. So we always want to make sure we wash them and grade them so we got the best quality going to the grocery store shelves nearest to you guys. And so I'll jump into the next piece of where the seed comes from. So we talked about how it's just a simple potato, which is pretty cool. And um, in most crops, what we would have is that the flower of the crop, as you may know, would get pollinated and seeds would form on that. And so what we have here in front of us are the flowers for this potato crop. Will turn into seed pods, but what's really cool about potatoes is those seeds. Every single seed is different than its brother or sister. And so if I was to take those seeds and plant them out, I wouldn't know what kind of potatoes I'm going to harvest. I could harvest white ones or purple ones or red ones, black ones, yellow, red skins or red flesh. It's all different. However, when I plant a crop, I kind of want to know what I'm going to harvest. So that's why we take the potato that was grown into the soil and plant that to grow a crop of potatoes. And so how do they make chips with potatoes? It's a great question. And I'm not a very good potato chip farmer because, well, I guess I've never grown chips for potatoes or potatoes for chips. Sorry. They just grow slightly different variety. Slice them nice and thin that they have a really nice color. So it's all in the physiological uh, physiology of the potato. So these potatoes that I'm growing are yellow potatoes. They have got a yellow skin and a yellow flesh, and they have a lot higher. They're a lot wetter. There's a lot more moisture in them. And typically in a chipping potato, they would be quite a bit drier, so that when they drop them into oil, they don't. They're able to fry much nicer and easier. So which province from Reina is better to grow potatoes in? I'd say each province is pretty darn cool. PEI is an awesome province, and they grow the most potatoes in Canada, from last I've heard, I believe. And they've got a really nice, cool climate and grow an awesome crop of potatoes. However, I grew up in Ontario. My family's here. So I'd have to say that Ontario is a pretty cool place because my family's here. Family means a lot to me, actually. So I love growing potatoes, and whether I do it in PEI or in Ontario or Alberta or British Columbia, for me, it's where I can be closest to my family and friends. And yeah, potatoes is a really cool industry, and agriculture honestly is a really cool industry to be a part of. And it's for a lot of people, it's so far. How do you get there, right? And reaching out to anyone in agriculture, really, we would love to see young people, and you don't have to have experience. I'm willing to train and work with anyone to teach them as long as they're willing to learn as much about farming, whether it's potatoes or sugar beets or corn or beans. As long as you're willing to learn, we would love to teach you. So reaching out to anyone in the agriculture industry, farm and food care is an excellent place to start, to find places to get jobs and to just learn more for sure. Yeah, so irrigation, that's something we talked about earlier, and we got a great question coming in on do potatoes use a lot of water? And they do. Potatoes to grow need a lot of water, just like ourselves, which we're made up of mostly water. We need a fair bit of water. We figure we need about 1 inch per acre of water. And what does that mean? So in physical terms, 1 acre inch of water, so enough water to put 1 inch across 1 acre, will take 27,154 gallons to achieve that. And that is a lot of water. So when I am sitting in this field here where we have 44 acres of potatoes growing, that's a really big number, and I cannot do that mental math right now. But it's a couple million gallons of water to put 1 acre inch. And water is a valuable resource. It's renewable most times of the year. However, when we get into June and July, like we are right now, and it's hot and dry, it's not raining. There's not a lot of water around. So what we do here at our farm to make sure we can conserve water and take water from periods in the year where we have all kinds of extra water is we dig ponds so that we can store that water from the winter or the fall or early spring when there's all kinds of extra water running into the streams and water courses. And that in that way we won't harm the environment, but we can take what we need for the year and keep it so that during the time like we are right now, we can put that down. And the one methods that we use is we want to drop that water as close as possible to the crops so that we get as little evaporation and the greatest amount of effectiveness possible. And so we use two types of technology here. One that was standing behind me, not sure if you guys can see it in the background there or not, but it's an irrigation pivot. And what that is it drives in a circle, which is why we call it a pivot, because it pivots in one spot, and it's got nozzles that are right above the top of the crop that drop the water nice and consistently even right into the crop. And the other piece we try to do is to not irrigate during the heat of the day. So right now, all of our irrigation systems are off, and this evening we'll go back around and we'll turn them all back on again so that we can reduce the amount of evaporation, the sun taking the water away before it even hits the crop. Because water is a valuable resource, and we got to do our due diligence to make sure we use that properly. And yeah, and just like we like to eat potatoes, a lot of other animals like to eat potatoes too. However, the tops aren't very tasty. So I can be in the fields working in the evening, and deer could go bouncing by down the rows past me, or there could be some turkeys sitting in the corner, but they usually won't eat the potato tops. They're not very tasty and kind of bitter, so they don't usually eat them. But the corn that's sitting in the field beside me, they love to eat the corn. It's a good, healthy, nutritious crop for them. Which perfect lead into the next question, and we do rotate our fields with other crops. So one of the pieces with potatoes is that it can be a little harder on the soil. We have to turn the soil over quite a bit. We need a lot of soil to make those hills around the potatoes, and as agronomists, I would say that's very hard on the soil because we're moving it so much. What we like to do is after the potatoes are harvested, we put what we call a cover crop. There's no financial gain for us to be made from this crop. It's for instance, just a crop of oats or rye that we'll seed after or plant after the potatoes to grow up and just to leave the biomass, so the mass or the vegetation that the crop grows, and just leave it on the soil to help protect the soil from wind and rain and to add some structure and more organic matter back into the soil. And then the next year we'll plant a crop like corn into it, which corn, it's lots of awesome discussions, but corn is a really big biomass producing crop. And biomass can be a pretty big word, but it produces a lot of plant material. And plant material is what we need to build organic matter. Um, and so it's very important for us to actually rotate crops. So with other crops we could rotate with would be rye or winter wheat or soybeans. We sometimes rotate with other vegetable farmers that grow tomatoes or onions or stuff like that. So there's lots of opportunity, but we have to be very careful how we do that so we can manage our soil well. And that's a good question. So we see here today there's all kinds of potatoes sitting behind me, but how do I know what's down there? And what we do is I have some scouts that work with us, and I can't be everywhere all the time. So I have some people that work with me that love walking and love to be outdoors, and they walk my fields for me, and they're my eyes and the ears. And sometimes what they do is I'll get them to dig up a stretch of field, and so we'll take 10 feet or so and just to get an idea of what's under the crop and try to be reasonably sure of what we have sitting down there so that when we go to harvest we know what we got. So I think that is bringing us to the end of our presentation. I thank you all so much for joining in and going on a quick tour of a potato field. So much to cover in such a little bit of time, but if you ever have any more questions, I would encourage you to reach out to the local farm near Farm and Food Care. They're awesome resources, and if there's ever more questions, we'd be happy to answer them.